You're listening to the Vint Podcast, where we bring you interviews and stories from around the world of wine and spirits. From winemakers and critics to sommeliers and master distillers, we'll explore the people and businesses who are instrumental in shaping the future of today's food and drinks culture. Enjoy the show. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Vint Podcast, a production of the Vint Marketplace, your source for premium wine and spirits at vintmarketplace.com. As always, I'm joined by Billy Galanko, who is with me in person for our once-a-year podcast recording.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting to be in the same room as you as we're recording. We're down in beautiful Charleston, South Carolina, and we have a really exciting episode coming up as well.
Yeah, I think we talked with Troth in one of our first 50 episodes for the first time. I believe it was the first 50. Good friends. Billy, I think you've been on the list there to get their wines. A project that Billy and I have sort of followed since that time and seen them grow a ton and really enjoyed speaking with them over the years.
Yeah, Troth, their mission was basically to, from the outset, create world-class wines from Washington State, like competing with, top-tier Bordeaux, Super Tuscans, all of that. So I had originally found them when we, as a company, were offering NFTs, wine NFTs, and I was really deep in the wine and crypto space, and they were one of the earlier companies that were accepting crypto for wine. So I actually bought some wine from them, like their actual first release with some Ethereum, which was pretty exciting.
Yeah, if you're rolling your eyes about the whole crypto thing, hang with us. I think what I've really been excited about from the beginning was the way the strategy they've taken of positioning their brand as super premium, ultra high end, from the packaging and just the bottle and label to the care that they take in the vineyard and then the winery to the way that they manage their allocation lists and the hospitality that they provide and the level of service that they provide. I've just been really fascinated by their ability to achieve that so early on in their growth and sort of sustain that as a mark of their brand. And so, yeah, certainly come for the crypto space, stay for the awesome wine, and obviously a great conversation with two very knowledgeable professionals in the space. But before we jump over to the interview, Billy, you have a little bit of news to cover for this week?
Yeah, we got a little excited last week and forgot to do the news. So we have two stories this week. The first one I want to get your thoughts on is Domaine Druhan. These are both articles from last week, but they are transporting this year. It says 60,000 bottles by 2026, and this year they're doing 30,500 bottles by sailing vessel from Europe to the U.S. What are your thoughts on this as a mode of transportation?
So this is bottled wine, not wine in barrel, bottled and corked, put on a boat, a sailboat, and brought across the Atlantic.
Yes, this is a sailing boat, and they say it cuts emissions by 90%, but it costs 3 times as much to bring the wine over by that amount.
Okay, and the idea is that these are wines that have been bottled but wouldn't have been released anyways for another, do they hold back wine typically?
No, it would be the same wines that they were going to be releasing. The idea is just to lower emissions across the board. It doesn't really say if they're going to send over a container ahead of time, and then this is just meant to refill what they expect to sell. It's more just trying to lead by example with sustainability.
But 3 times as much in terms of transportation. I assume it's not like a sailboat that you put out on a pond that has a a little single mast, but that's pretty cool.
Yeah, my concern is we have a lot of customers for the Vint Marketplace who are always wondering about the amount of time that the wine is in transit. So I think if you're doing something that dramatically increases the time in transit, I mean, I know it's going to be, temperature controlled and everything, but I still think I don't know if it's worth the exact offset. But I think obviously in the long term, we need to do everything we can to them, for them to maintain their style and stuff. So I guess they're really just forward thinking in that aspect.
Yeah, I mean, just from a brand perspective and sort of having a story to tell about that particular wine, I think it'll probably be powerful. Can't imagine they continue doing it for super long, but it's a cool project.
Yeah, and now that I'm thinking about the quantities, even if they ramped up to 60,000 bottles, that's 5,000 cases, 12 packs. So I mean, it's probably just still a drop in the water for what they're doing. But yeah, so then the next one is something that you might find interesting growing up in more of a farming community. They have started training dogs to identify vine diseases, and they've been proven to be very adept at doing so in some California tests.
Wow. Yeah, very cool. We were watching Cops the other day, and the dogs were doing a great job at sniffing out the things that they need to in those situations. So I feel like they could definitely do it in the vineyard too. I hadn't thought of that, but like the terriers that hunt truffles, right? So that it makes sense that they could be able to identify other types of vegetation and variations.
So the things that I actually hadn't thought about, because I thought they were, how like they say some dogs can like smell cancer too. So I thought they were just purely smelling disease, and apparently they're really effective at finding a leaf roll virus. But what they're also identifying are like bugs, like ahead of time. It's saying like mealy bugs they can identify. And it says they're exactly 3.4 times more effective than humans in spotting the eggs of the invasive spotted lanternfly, which I would think maybe they would be more effective than 3.4 times, but who knows?
Yeah, I don't know if I've come across many lanternfly eggs, but I do try and kill them every time I see them, if that's helpful.
Yeah. Well, good job. You're saving the grapevines from around the country.
That's neat. Yeah, another good boy story, a goodest of boy for whatever dogs are being trained to do that work. That's pretty cool too. Yeah, thanks for sharing the news this week. Obviously, you can find news every week on vintmarketplace.com, where Billy puts out a ton of great articles and synthesizes the latest news in the industry each week. Billy, do you want to give a quick rundown of our guests again today? I know we mentioned Troth and that they're friends of the pod, but why don't you give them just a little lead in?
Yeah. I wanted to talk about just a little bit more detail about their wines. So Troth was the brainchild of our guest today, Jeff Andrews, along with his longtime friend and winemaker, Ray McKee. And basically, Jeff is from a long family of farmers in Washington State. And now they've also been grape growers for multiple generations, I believe. And they decided that they wanted to make, like I said before, world-class wines. So what they did was they took their best blocks possible from the other wines that they've been making and identified basically all of the top performers. And they really focused on Cabernet at the beginning, but now they're also offering some Syrah, they're offering Cabernet or Sauvignon Blanc. So there's a number of different offerings, but basically the idea from the beginning was the best of the best plots. They built a new winery specifically to vinify all of these wines in the top way possible. They hand pick, and everything is basically no price is cut. Or wait, what is that saying? No cost is spared, and all of the attention to detail is in every step. So it's been really cool. I've tasted a few of the ones that I bought. Really excited to visit them, but the level of quality that they've been striving for has been recognized with many high 90s scores from many different critics, and their list is growing and growing. So it's really exciting to kind of see how far they've come since we first had them on the pod about 3 years ago.
Before we get to the interview with the guys from Troth, just want to remind everyone to check out our wine and spirits retail store at vintmarketplace.com, also the place where you can find that great educational content, but you can also find all the best fine wines from around the world. We're one of the largest selections in the United States, and we have some of the most competitive pricing for enthusiasts and collectors, sort of wherever you find yourself in the journey. The Vint Marketplace is your go-to shop for stocking your wine cellar and enjoying more wine from around the world. And now, without further ado, here are Ray and Jeff from Troth.
Hi, Jeff and Ray. Thanks so much for joining today.
Hey, good to see you.
Yeah, we were just talking about how long it's been since we first had you guys on. We really appreciate you guys being one of the early guests on the Vint podcast, and excited to introduce all of our listeners that we've gotten sent to Troth and all the work that you guys are doing up in Washington State. Could you give us a little background on each of you, your roles in the company, who you guys are, and then we'll dive into Troth as a brand in Washington State wines?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we're really excited to be back. So I'm the managing partner of Andrews Family Vineyards, which is proprietor for Trothe and our Sagebreaker labels. We are a fourth generation family farming operation in the Horseheaven Hills of Washington State. My great grandparents broke ground in the early 1940s, and the family has dabbled in pretty much every crop you could grow out here up until we put in wine grapes in the 1980s, some of the first in the Horseheaven Hills, and really grew our wine grape holdings along with Washington State as it saw some explosive growth. In 2018, Ray and I, after getting to know each other over, about 10 years or so, got together and launched a little Cabernet project with the goal of producing really the very best Cabernet that we could produce from our site as a great expression of Andrews Family Vineyards and Horse Heaven Hills, and a wine that we'd be proud to put at the table with the best wines from around the world to represent Washington State.
Yeah, I'm Ray McKee, the winemaker for Trothe and Sagebreaker. I had the great fortune to move here when I was 13 with my parents, who started a winery in the Yakima Valley. They're very early on. I think their bonded winery number was 88, if I'm remembering correctly. So I got to grow up in the industry, and it's been amazing to be a part of the second generation, continuing to express Washington State and watch it grow. We're over 1,000 wineries now. It's pretty awesome. But we're also getting into all of the intricacies of terroir and estate vineyards and all this neat stuff. So where I am in my career, Trothe was a magnificent opportunity to make the best wines possible from absolutely phenomenal vineyard.
Yeah, maybe you can go a little bit into Trothe itself, how it was started. In those early couple of days, I know that there's been quite an evolution over the last couple of years, establishing it as, from the beginning, a premium brand in the space, in that luxury, ultra luxury category, and why that sort of ethos was important to you guys to represent Washington State.
Absolutely. So one thing we both noticed over our careers is that Washington State is often missing from the fine wine conversation, and Horse Heaven Hills in particular. Or when it is talked about, it's almost there, or it's a good value, or there's always a qualifier on Washington, unfortunately, and there shouldn't be, because the wines coming out of Washington are world-class, period. So the idea behind Trothe was to seize on that and create a wine that, as I'd mentioned, you could sit down with the very best chateaus or wineries from around the world, and it wouldn't only hold its own, it would knock people's socks off and wow, this is one of the best, right? It's one of the elite tiers of wines. And so that was the goal. And so Ray and I reconnected in 2018 after he left Chateau Ste. Michelle. At the time, the goal with Trothe was to only produce Cabernet. And we managed to do that for all of one vintage before we started some other varieties. So it's expanded a bit from there. But no matter what variety we're producing, Cabernet is our flagship. The goal is the same. Produce wines with no exceptions being made in terms of quality and inputs, doing everything that needs to be done, whether it's out in the vineyard or in the winery, to produce amazing wines.
Yeah, I think with Trothe, one of the strengths that we have is we are a vineyard estate winery. And as we're using that strength, that evolution we've gone through over into our 6th vintage production, our 4th release, that has allowed us to be extremely nimble. The ability to react to what is that we are learning. Basically, the market is all out there doing what it's doing, and we just keep learning more. And I think one of the neat things that I've learned from this was the importance of our role, not just in making a world-class Cabernet, but the role of a 4th generation grower in the Horse Heaven Hills and a 2nd generation winemaker in continuing the push for the recognition of Washington. Almost by any measure a customer might look like how many great scores in the 90s we are at the top of the expression of fine wine. And then picking up and doing what my parents started doing and a lot of the people I grew up with. And it's become really important to me to continue doing that as a 2nd generation Washington winemaker.
On the note of Washington as a whole, how have you guys seen the progression in terms of people's recognizing and understanding maybe some of the AVAs and like the prestige in certain areas a little bit more? I know there was an education hurdle because a lot of people recognize like the name Napa, and even now maybe they'll know St. Helena or Howell Mountain. But I think, at least talking to some of my sommelier friends, there's more and more recognition and people seeking out places like Horse Heaven Hills or Red Mountain. Have you seen that progress in the past few years?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I think especially when in the fine wine world, Washington is it is a darling of sommeliers all over the United States. We have some really lovely expressions of Cabernet from single vineyard sites and AVAs they're becoming their own thing. And then when you roll in Syrah and Grenache and how well we do expressing those from the unique AVAs like the Rocks District and Walla Walla, the education level's going way up. And also part of that is how when we launched Trothe, our approach had to be social media, email, podcasts, interactions with media. It's all that was available. And that has grown tremendously over the last 6 years. And it's something we put a huge amount of effort into because you reach the widest audience. And it's probably why 65%, almost 70% of Trothe wine buyers are not in Washington State, which is about flipped for most Washington wineries. But the ability to reach customers through a podcast just like yours. What episode are you guys on now? You're way up there, aren't you?
I think we're at 160. I think that's what this will be.
Oh, fabulous.
Maybe
Love it.
more.
Yeah, it's just really broad. It's made education easy to find for wine lovers.
Yeah, just to dovetail off that just a little bit, I think when you think about the wine buying public, there's all sorts of almost tiers, right? From your most educated, very into it, to your very casual buyer. And Trothe wines, of course, are geared more towards collectors and more toward that upper category, I guess you could say, of buyers. But even within that, people who know a lot about wine, there's still a lot of discovery that can happen in Washington State and knowledge that they can learn about the different AVAs. And I think that we're going to see as Washington keeps getting more and more AVAs, you'll see more high quality wineries popping up in those and being the standard bearers for those AVAs. And I think in the coming years, we'll see even more coming out of that.
One difficulty some people had in learning the AVAs is that there was a lack of tasting rooms, I guess, out there. There's a lot of vineyards and some of it was further out. I know you guys mentioned this last time. Are you seeing that change at all too? Is it getting a little bit more easy to taste closer to the vineyard, or are you still having tasting rooms centered around like Walla Walla?
I think you see a lot of tasting rooms. Walla Walla, I think its growth in tasting rooms is still exploding. Woodinville as well over on the other side of the state. The Horse Heaven Hills is such that, I don't know, until Elon Musk has some kind of like helicopter robo-taxis to bring people out here, there's not going to be a lot of people coming out to the Horse Heaven Hills. But that's okay. That gives us the ability to focus on making these incredible wines. And then we have found that when we do have people come out here, we get to have a really nice experience with them. And we end up with lifelong fans that just, not only for us, but the Horse Heaven Hills in general, they come away with a real understanding of what this area is capable of doing.
I think part of what has made it more successful the last, let's say since COVID, the customers are going about their wine experiences in different ways. Pre-COVID, it would not be uncommon for a wine lover to want to visit 7 or 8 tasting rooms. Now we have customers come in and they want to spend 3 or 4 hours with us. We do full vineyard exploration, in-depth tasting with people that arrive here, and you get a lot more relationship building. And that is really driven. I would have loved to have spent more time with customers back in the day, but they're moving on to the next one. And now they're really driving this change. And it is great for someone like us, because if I want to meet with a customer, I do want to spend a little time, because wine is the thing that bonds those relationships together. It isn't the sole purpose to come here. It's to meet interesting people, share our love of wine, show them Trothe and Sagebreaker, and that length of visit that's fairly common now has helped a lot.
Yeah, I wonder how much, it sounds like you're talking about that as a little bit of a greater theme across, maybe you're seeing a number of producer friends have a similar experience, but how much of that in terms of bespoke hospitality and people wanting to come and spend 3-4 hours with you guys, do you think is aided by the way that you positioned your brand from the start? And I really want to dig into that a little bit, because you guys have been super intentional, like I said in the beginning, about positioning Troth as upper end premium wine across the labels, across the varieties that you bottle. And I know starting out, that can be a challenge to live up to that premium branding, but you guys have done it in a really excellent way. So I'm curious the way you think about that strategically in your hospitality.
Yeah, that's definitely been part of our strategy from the beginning. Ray and I have talked about it for both of us. If we go to a winery, what do we want to do? Do we want to stand at the tasting bar and have somebody show you the list and you get 5 tastings for price? And it's okay. That can be an okay experience, sure. And it works great for some, especially if you have a high traffic area. But I really love to go to a winery and I might get to meet the winemaker or the vineyard manager or somebody who's involved with their hands in the process, chat with them for a little bit about what they've done and what's going on in their vineyards of their world. And I'll walk away personally with a better experience. As we talked about what we wanted to do, not having a tasting room, not only because it was COVID, but even if it hadn't been COVID, pretty sure we would have decided tasting rooms, not the route we want to go. We want to build relationships one customer at a time. And I feel like, with a brand like Trothe and the price points we ask people to pay, that's really an important part of the experience.
Yeah, I grew up with this through my teenage years with my parents, and all of their best customers spent a lot of time with them. And that's what my parents and my mom especially loved about the wine industry was those relationships. You have wine and it easily accompanies conversation and food. And there were just so many times we would have someone come into the tasting room, love the wines. And my parents were like, we're closing a little while. Let's grab a cheese plate and hang out for a bit and chit chat. And it is a lovely lifestyle. I'll tell you that.
When people come out to visit you guys, you said it's like parachute into Horse Heaven Hills to get out there sometimes, depending on where you're coming from. What sort of infrastructure is developed in that area, just in terms of hospitality generally, lodging, food, like all that sort of scene? Have you seen in the last decade or so just the blossoming of that as well?
So in the Horse Heaven Hills, unfortunately, there's not a lot. Near the gas station, and that's not hospitality, but just to give you an idea, 25 miles away. There's one little restaurant that just opened up down the road if you want a burger. There's a winery to the south of us, Alexander and Nicole. They do a really nice job, and they have tiny houses that they rent out. That actually, then they do a great job with that, and those things are booked out all the time, and allows people to stay right on their property, check out their vineyards and winery. So there have been things like that. So expanding out from the Horse Heaven Hills a little bit, Prosser has a couple decent restaurants and a couple hotels, but really it seems like the hospitality centers have been Walla Walla, Woodinville, and Red Mountain because of its proximity to the Tri-Cities area and the population is there.
Is that something you guys want to take part in the future? Would you consider like on-premise lodging, hospitality, that kind of stuff? Or what does that sort of look like as the project evolves?
I think Ray's telling me we don't say no to anything. We're not going to say no to that out of hand.
The answer is always yes until it's no.
Yeah, right.
Nice.
Yeah, we've had a lot of success that way. I think that you describe still the largest single hurdle for Washington wine. We are not close to a major population center. Everyone, like Bordeaux, for example, when you imagine Bordeaux and the chateaus, et cetera, you're like, oh my gosh, amazing, beautiful countryside. Bordeaux is a city of more than 1 million people in a major port. These types of things like Napa is so close to the San Francisco Bay Area that spreads the word quickly. So we've embraced that fact. It's going to be hard to overcome. It's slowly being built. A few more luxury hotels are coming in close enough you can day trip to see us. But we knew that we couldn't rely on that. So we've put so much effort into going where our customers are and had great success with that.
So what is like breakdown between, I know you guys said that you said maybe 30% is from Washington State and 70% outside of now. Has that been since sort of the beginning you've experienced that? And what have been your most successful channels for distribution out to your lists? Is it really sort of relationship by relationship, call in, do your allocation, that kind of thing?
Yeah, we've been almost 100% DTC through our website since the beginning. I think that, so of course, launching during COVID or the tail end of it, if you think back to that time, what we were all doing, we were mostly stuck at home and probably bored. So you're on your computer, on your phone or whatever. And so when we would get press, it's out there. We got amazing articles like in the Raw Report and a couple other publications. and people would read them and they'd be interested and they'd click through, and that helped get the flywheel going, as you say, pretty quickly. And then through word of mouth and continued press coverage, we've seen growth. And so our media strategy has mostly been to focus on national press and prominent critics. And I think that's helped us with those numbers in terms of the ratio. So it really has been from the beginning, the majority of customers have been from outside Washington State.
Let's dive into the portfolio of Trothe. And if you guys want to talk about Sagebreaker as well, I'm not as familiar with that. If you want to fill folks in, but it'd be cool to dive in specifically in like when you're talking about the wines, what they're made of, and then your process that's so attention and detail oriented as well.
Yeah, I'll lay out real quickly what we've got with each brand, and I'll let Ray dig in a little bit to each wine and processes. As we mentioned, the flagship of the Trothe brand is our Cabernet Sauvignon. Usually been on always 100% Cabernet, trying to create a very pure expression of it, true to our site. In the second year, our second vintage, we added what we call our limited series. So here at Andrews Family Vineyards, we have 29 varieties growing on our site. And that's one of the unique things about Washington, is that so many varieties thrive and do well, that Washington doesn't just have one or two varieties that it's known for that can only do well. With 29 varieties here in any given vintage, you can find a rock star variety that's just, for whatever reason, interacting with Mother Nature in the right way. Between me, Ray, and our vineyard manager, Todd, we're out in the vineyard. We find that variety in the block, and we'll make a very limited quantity, usually about 40 cases of that. Then we added Sauvignon Blanc to the lineup, and we also added Syrah. And to take that Sauvignon Blanc one step further, we began with a concrete fermented and aged Sauvignon Blanc, and now we're adding a barrel fermented and aged Sauvignon Blanc to the program. So those are our Trothe wines. Sagebreaker wines are designed to also be very representative of the site, Washington State. Also very high end, but more in line with what the consumers expect from a high end Washington wine, and also very accessible to people who are beginning a little further in their wine journey, but maybe not ready for a super luxury wine like Trothe. And with Sagebreaker, we have a Bordeaux blend, a Rhone blend on the red side, and a Rhone white.
Yeah, the wine growing and winemaking for Trothe is very simple. The approach is uncompromising. We create a natural and artistic product. Wine is wildly complex, coming from wine grapes to the bottle. And as the winemaker, I get to use that as an expression for my own artistry or craft, if you will, whatnot. But the goal is perfection, and perfection is not attainable. But still striving for that is the definition of true. We do not compromise. It's an amazing experience and to be a part of from my point of view as the winemaker. But on the wine growing side, where the vast majority of the work takes place, it is phenomenal to see the impact you can have when you decide you're not going to accept something slightly less. That's really how we go about with Trothe and crafting those wines. It's very classic expressions. They're terroir driven from this place. So I do not put a large stamp of style upon them. But Sagebreaker, on the other hand, was a little bit of, we were always going to have that. It's a description of the history of this place. When Jeff's great grandfather was out here turning this ground into farmland, it was wild. Everything's only about this tall that grows out here, but you still need to clear that ground. You're breaking the ground, and Sagebreaker is a term that described what we did out here. But it is a feature of the Port Seven Hills is we grow a lot of everything and grow it very well. It's an agricultural area. And the Sagebreaker wines are meant to help wine drinkers move into fine wine. You don't jump from, in my case, Bartles and James to Trothe Cabernet. There's some wines along the way that get you there, and generally they're yummy. They're good. They're easy to understand, and they're quite enjoyable. And so Sagebreaker's given us growing, but also as our winemaking here, gives us a ton of outlet for creativity to really push ourselves. I heard this great quote by David Bowie a little while ago. He said, as a creative person, if you are always on firm footing, you are not going to be challenged, and what you create could be better. It's like walking out into the ocean until you can't quite feel the bottom, and now you're in a place where really interesting things can happen. And that's what we get to use Sagebreaker for. And then also make really yummy wines that are easy for our customers to dive into.
Are you selling that is in the same way that you are the Troth wines? Like it's all D2C. Is the breakdown in terms of your customer, not the demographic, but the distribution across the country, similar at this point?
Yeah, very similar. So Sagebreaker does have its own list, but everybody who is on the Trothe list is also on the Sagebreaker list. So yeah, demographics and everything are very similar. Though on the Sagebreaker list, so we went to Taste Washington this year. It's a great event with a couple hundred Washington wineries every year. And we weren't sure, that was our first trip there. Weren't sure exactly what to expect. We were pouring the Sagebreaker wines. And yeah, they were a hit, which was really cool. And so through word of mouth and connections with that, we have seen surge, I guess you could say, of Washington customers right off the bat.
Cool. So on the Troth, going back to the Cabernet side, can you talk a little bit about like the nitty gritty in terms of maybe how it's made, like the sorting and the processing process, and then what people can, comparing that to a top end Bordeaux or Napa, and then also maybe what the profile folks could look for, and when they're comparing these, and maybe it's going to be distinctly Washington, but any parallels or differences between, say, Napa or Bordeaux styles?
Sure. On the vineyard side, you've heard us mention over 1,000 acres and 29 varieties, and somebody who's listening might go, whoa, this is just a big commercial operation, but it is not. We take what we call a micro crew approach to how we handle our Trothe wines. There is just as much or more hand labor going on in our vineyard, particularly in Trothe blocks and Sagebreaker blocks, as any of the highest end wineries from around the world. We have a very dedicated team that's been with us for, gosh, I'd say the average time in service is getting close to 15 years on people that are out there daily making the actual, we give them the direction, and then they have to go out to the vineyard, of course, and exercise that. And so we're relying on them and institutional knowledge and their own personal dedication to producing amazing wine grapes that will result in amazing wine. On the vineyard side of things, that micro brew approach is really key to making sure that Trothe ends up in the bottle the way it does, or ends up in the winery in a way that Ray can put it in the bottle in the way that it does.
Yeah. All over the world, it is not accidental. It's quite purposeful that the best wines are estate, where you have 100% control of the vineyard and the winery, because 80 or 90% of the expression and quality come from the vineyard. So everything we do out in the vineyard brings to me perfectly ripened, uniformly ripened, the right crop loads, the leaf area to the fruit zone, so that I can capture the terroir. You can lose terroir quite easily. Overcropping, you lose terroir. If your vintage is rained out, you lose terroir. If you have too little crop, you lose terroir. If you have too ripe of fruit or too underripe of fruit, your terroir is gone, and then it starts tasting like something else. So that is a large strength, our micro crew approach, but also the ability to make decisions that get acted on within minutes. I am looking at our vineyard right now, and we can have anything happen almost instantaneously. And you don't need to react that fast with wine grapes, but that we can allows us to change our mind 4 or 5 times and find our way to just the right decision, because vintages are quite variable now and they're warm. And so it takes a very active approach to get those grapes. That is the foundation of Trothe's success. And bringing it into the winery, then we use technology that basically gives us unlimited labor. Great estates were hand sorting with 40 or 50 people to ensure you had just perfect grapes and no other material that you don't want in there, like leaves and stems, etc. Now with technology, we have much better destemming capability, remove the grapes from the stems, and optical sorting, which allows us to sort every single thing out that we don't want. And then when you have those pure, great, uniformly ripened grapes, you can build a wine like Trothe. This technology is standard across every top estate in the world now. And when I first saw this, when it was coming into wine grapes, maybe about 2010, I looked at it and I knew that is going to be a key for the best expressions of wines in the world, because you take away the variability of a leaf here or a stem there, which doesn't allow me as a winemaker to unlock the fullest, perfect potential of that grape. For example, if your red wines are macerated on their skins, that's where all of the color and mouthfeel and density and complexity comes from. Now imagine I'm tasting and I'm looking at it. Oh, I'd love to stay on the skins for 20 more days because they're so amazing this year. However, I can taste all these green, bitter leaves in there. It's the ability to have perfect grapes unlocks your terroir in amazing ways. And that's how we go about treating all of the wines as they come in. And it's actually a very simple and fast process. Optical sorters replace about 50 people hand sorting grapes. It's really technology giving us unlocking unlimited labor. And then in the winery, we're quite minimal. I used yeasts, native and commercial. And commercial yeasts, if you know them, let's be perfectly clear about what they are. Commercial yeasts are yeasts from great vineyards that have been propagated. We're not out there inventing yeasts. A yeast exists out in nature. And when you have a yeast that you love, like one of my favorites came from Montalcino back in the 80s, and it's a fabulous fermenter, et cetera, et cetera. So we use both types of yeast, and that's it. We craft the wine. Everything that a grape wine needs is in the grape. So that's why we spend so much effort on the vineyard side to make sure the grapes have everything. Then we ferment and we age in barrels and bottle it. Very simple process. It is immensely time consuming and but really great, really fun as a winemaker to be a part of.
And your question, or part of the question about similarities to other estates and whatnot, I think the primary similarity, at least from my perspective, that you're going to see is the very best estates around the world, their Cabernet tastes like it came from their site, and you can recognize that. You should be able to get that from our wines. If you're not, we haven't done something correctly. And so that's really important. And then another layer down, the vintage variability is going to be there as well. You should be able to identify at least the type of vintage that it came from. And somebody like you, Billy, with the training you're going through, you could probably tell us the vintage it came from and things like that are really key to some of the finest wines around the world. Doesn't just taste like the grape. There's so much more to it. But a key point of it is also it does taste like the grape. That hasn't been hidden as well. So all the great characteristics of Cabernet come out.
Yeah. So for a wine lover who hasn't had Trothe before, you can expect to see our vineyard. We're in the Horse Heaven Hills. We are quite warm and quite windy, and this results in very thick skinned Cabernet. So we have a density of color and flavor and tannin. We grow on fine soils, finer than sand, on top of broken basalt. So this yields a mouthfeel expression in your tannin that is a very powdery, fine expression, not large and chunky and chewy. And then the density of the skins allows for a really rich mouthfeel. So you have layer upon layer of fine, lovely tannin from the soils, and then the complexity of color, flavors. We grow on our own roots here. So for the varietal expression of Cabernet is quite pure. It's one of Washington's strengths. Most vineyards are grown in phylloxera-free vineyards, and that varietal expression, the typicity, is strong. It is quite easy to recognize a Cabernet, a Syrah, a Merlot, a Grenache, etc., when you grow on your own roots. And then from our point of view as the estate, capturing the freshness. That's another great descriptor of Washington wines. We grow in a warm area, but we're not as warm as lots of other regions. So you get just ripe fruit. So there's a lot of fresh fruit character, not necessarily pruny, plummy character of a very hot, ripe zone. Our acid levels are well maintained here. We have, being this far north and growing, we typically see a minimum of 40-degree difference between the day and the night temperatures. So even when it's the hottest part of summer and it's 100 degrees, it'll drop down into 65 in the evening because we are technically a high desert climate here. That's also expressed in Andrew's family wines, and in a really good Washington wines will show those same characters. And I am showing you just our sites. We have several old blocks that have been in the ground for a long time, and old block vines know where they live and they know how to ripen just the right amount of fruit. So they generally are the best compared to young. Young are a little bit wild. They throw a lot of fruit. They get a little bit crazy in their youth and as they settle in. So that is also a key component of Trothe and expressing our terroir.
What can you say? I guess two things here. One, is it difficult? And do you find there's the extremely slim margin of error for picking those grapes at the right time, given exposure and a little bit warmer, but also trying to preserve that acidity? And your wines don't get massive into, you're not bottling at 15% alcohol or anything like that. Do you find that the margin of error when picking is pretty slim?
You have touched on something that has been a very hot topic of conversation for us the last couple of vintages. I'm going to let Ray talk about it, but that is on our mind all the time.
Yeah. The Cabernet is a variety. There's a reason that it's grown all over the world, is it is amenable to all kinds of different terroir. And it also is really good for quite some time. A varietal like Sauvignon Blanc, most of the places it's grown, you have a very small picking window to get it right. Through my career growing up in wine, I found when I was a young winemaker, I thought, I've got weeks to get the Cabernet picked just right. And it is really one of the areas I've spent a lot of energy in understanding the ground and the rows and each exact place where we get our grapes from, because the picking window is actually quite small when you're chasing perfection. And it is, again, because I can change my mind back and forth 50 times, it's allowed me to really be a little bit spoiled. I can plan when I want to pick and I can taste it and say, it's just perfect, Jeff. And then an hour before I can panic and run out and check the vineyard and tell them, no, we're going to wait until tomorrow morning because this one more day of great sunshine is just going to be perfect. But yes, as I've grown as a winemaker and understanding unlocking those grapes, because they have everything you need to make a great wine. And I need to understand how to get them out of it. I've found that window shrinks and shrinks and shrinks. And now most of my decisions are on a daily basis and not a weekly basis.
Yeah, that's interesting. The other thing I wanted to mention was just like your oak program and what that's like. What kind of oak are you guys using, and across maybe your different labels, what does that look like? And how do you think about that, and just in terms of style that you're trying to create at Troth?
Yeah. So my education in wine was through working for great winemakers and great wineries. And I went about it really purposeful because I realized early on that there are people that know all of this stuff. And if you just summer work for them, they'll give it all to you. Mentorship is what we call it now. And so I worked at a very large winery in Washington for that reason, because when I was at Chateau Saint Michel as the red winemaker, we were in a tremendous growth period where I could practice and experiment with almost anything I wanted. And that included, so in my personal tasting history, I learned what most vineyards in Washington, high-end vineyards, what their grapes taste like because I got to make them. And then I learned what interactions with barrels happen, because barrels themselves are unique. They're sourced from individual trees and individual forests, and they're made by individual coopers. And those coopers put their own sense of style on them. There are barrels. If you try a wine and that winery uses that same barrel, they can be so strong of flavor that you could associate that winery with that barrel flavor, but it really is that barrel is so strong in flavor. So that part of the education was phenomenal for me. So when we were philosophizing and deciding on Trothe, we knew it needed to be a wine of terroir, and oak is a necessary component of Cabernet. but it needed to be quiet. It needed to be the silent partner in our wines. So I worked really closely with a tremendous French cooperage. They craft barrels in much more Burgundian style, which is that quiet oak that is in the wine that you might not be able to point your finger at every time, but without it, you would notice. Like kind of the more expensive, the better a French barrel is, the less you can tell it's been used, but they're an integral component of it. And then it was a neat bit of history when we were starting this, the cooperage, they were transitioning in generations to, I believe, their fourth generation owner. And Cedric got totally hyped about Trothe because we said, we're going to try to make the best Cabernet in the world in Washington that can sit with any of them. And I want to get really geeky with the wood. I have some really strong ideas about the individual forest sourcing, our toasting components. And we ended up crafting and building these recipes based on the forest source and the toasting that match the elevation of our vineyard sites. Because that elevation of site here gives us some very unique expressions from our 3 or 4 blocks of cab in here. A lot of energy went into it.
I was curious about that. What's the goal with thinking about the elevation of the forest sites and stuff?
Yeah, I think it was like the strongest characteristic because we're the growers. We grow across a lot of property. Like most of the property we grow is at the bottoms of our canyons where we don't grow anything and up the sides. We're growing across the tops of this, it's called variegated scab land out here. And the elevation change was the strongest difference. It created, even one of our blocks is about a mile from here. And the temperature change there in up until about noon is sometimes 10 degrees, only 1 mile away. So that elevation was the primary difference because they were a lot of the same clonal material of Cabernet. Age was a little bit different, but that elevation really changed the tannin expression, the acid holding ability of the grapes. So it's really what I looked at and thought that is the big difference with these.
Yeah, that I think that makes a lot of sense. I've been going down a lot of super winey rabbit holes, so we'll have to catch up after this. I've been reading like Jamie Good's book, The Science of Wine, and the levels of Brettanomyces in certain forests in France. We'll save that for later. But I think something that I don't think, and I wanted to go back a little bit to like the picking window part too, that everybody, maybe some wine drinkers don't focus on as much, is your varieties and getting the level of quality you guys are looking for. Say, Cabernet is one thing, and if you guys were only doing that, that's hard enough as it is. But then also the Syrah and the Grenache. I know the Grenache can basically just fall off a cliff depending on, in terms of acidity, if you're too slow. And then Syrah is its own beast altogether. Can you talk a little bit about how you guys go about harvesting and keeping those qualities? Because I know they can be staggered, but it's just so interesting. You guys can build a portfolio of the same level of quality each year, but also maintaining this level of detail for each wine.
Harvest is very staggered. So if you take our Sauvignon Blanc, we could be picking that as early as maybe the 15th of August, maybe more typically the 20-something of August. And then Ray's bringing in our last picks of the year, first or second week of October, generally. If it's a cooler year, maybe that stretches out to the third week of October. So it's a very extended harvest. But the key to all of it is really what Ray said, where he's out there constantly. And he's out there with Ian, his enologist. Todd, as I mentioned before, comes out there as well as myself. Put our heads together, walk the rows, taste. Generally defer to Ray, but give him a little bit of feedback. But it really is boots on the ground, being out there in the vines, experience to determine those pick windows. So with all the acres we have here at Andrews Family Vineyards, that's a very tiny percentage that is going to Trothe and Sagebreaker. Doesn't even make up 1%. It's probably closer to 0.5%. So all of those other grapes and varieties we're growing, they're going to other customers, mostly in Washington, but actually up into British Columbia now and other places in the United States. We've got about 70 customers that we work with. So harvest logistics are real, and making sure that not only they get the dates they want, but that Ray gets the priority for these programs. Yeah, there's a lot of shuffling every day with harvest to make sure that grapes are picked at the right time, and the flexibility of our crew in the field, our assistant vineyard managers and foremen and hand crew, and what they're willing to do and drive back and forth across the miles of roads out in the vineyard to go pick a little bit here or a little bit there so that Ray can get what he wants when he wants. It makes all the difference.
Yeah, that Jeff's described the basic ingredient to that success is our willingness to do whatever it takes, to not compromise. And when every part of the team knows that we're going to do whatever it takes, then it's easy. It isn't as if we're asking for something wildly complex. And when we're not used to it, we're used to doing it the hard way, because that is the way you get to the quality. And then my personal life journey or whatever, as I am absolutely love being a winemaker. It is the creative outlet for how my mind works with both the science of fermentation and growing, but also the artistry. We take a bunch of grapes and somehow magically turn it into a drink, something that is wildly complex that can last for 100 years. There's nothing else like it on the planet. If you take an apple and you make it into cider, it still tastes like apples. Wine grape turn into amazing complexity. And I just am totally enamored with this process. And growing is a yearly cycle. It has ups and downs, and harvest, when all of this activity takes place, the most important decisions, all of us on the team, from someone who is picking the grapes for us, they work year round with us as well, to our cellar crew, to me, Jeff and Todd, we know it's the most important time. It's been building up all year. And so unlimited amounts of energy can be poured into it, because we all know this is when the rubber hits the road. Now is the time. All the work we've done, we need to make this perfect, near perfect picking decision and fermentation decisions. So it's just become part of what we do now.
How much
treat.
How much has technology helped you guys refine, like identifying these picking windows, refine like optimizations, obviously sorting, but in the winery as well? I think there's a common misconception
on the
of
vineyard side, we have toyed with a lot of different technology. I would say when it comes down to picking and picking window, there's no better technology than popping that fruit in your mouth and tasting it and getting a feel for not only the flavors, but the tannin profile, what the seed tastes like, the crunch up, and all those things. That's really what it comes down to. Of course, you run your labs and you ground truth what you get from the labs through that tasting experience, and Ray puts it together to make his picking decisions. I don't know that there's been a lot of technological advancements to help with picking decisions.
I think the ease of maintaining data. At home, I still have a box of all of my vintage notebooks, and now I don't write down anything anymore. It's all contained in the cloud on my phone, which it just contains a vast amount of data. And keeping that data and getting access to it is so much easier. So that's helpful. Maybe 20 years ago, as I got closer to harvest, I would sit down and I would review the data that we would have collected, days of sunshine, when bud break happened, how the crop load that we're going through, and look at the wines I had made and vintage to vintage, and like refresh and open up that portion of my brain that I hadn't used since the previous August. And now that data is just at my fingertips. It's so much easier to get to, because each vintage is unique, but the data that you build up helps me to anticipate what might be occurring in the coming vintage. Because until you make that first wine, you're never quite sure what is the density of tannin from this vintage and expression of sunshine. What is the color component? What am I seeing it with variability or lack of? And how am I going to unlock what's coming out of this vintage that's there? Because the terroir is the place you grow up, but terroir includes the impact of Mother Nature and the whole growing season on that ground. So it is an integral part of that final wine, is what the vintage did to that ground.
Yeah,
that's where technology has helped a lot.
I think that's a great point. Hadn't thought of it from that perspective. So like when I came back to the farm, that was 2006. My dad was not using a computer for much of anything. Everything was in notebooks scattered all over the place, whether it's in his office or behind the seeders pickup or whatever. And so you get the harvest time and you want to look through past year's data. It takes you half the day just to find it. And so now we have a very robust data collecting software as well as reporting software. So yeah, Ray's right. Everything that you could want to know about past vintages or what we've done up to that point in the vintage is all available.
Yeah, because that's what I was trying to get at, was basically a lot of consumers view technology being used in the wine industry as like making it less a wine of place or more commercial. But what it's really allowing is for a better expression of place if you use it in the right way. Like what you guys are saying, keeping track of the history, keeping track of certain details throughout the harvest allow you to make a better and more expressive wine. So that's awesome.
You're right, Billy. A lot of consumers, I feel like if you use the word technology, it's, oh, wait a minute, I thought we were talking about fine wine. But technology really it's instrumental to making wines like Trothe.
Yeah. Past vintages allow you to get the purest potential out of the current vintage. What has happened in this place? And that's one of the cool things about grapes too. They live in the same place for decades and decades. The neatest experiences I had as a young winemaker was tasting vintages going back into the early 80s, made by one of our more famous winemakers in Washington. And that I tasted those when I was about 24. And I saw what we had done, where we had been in several really cool vineyards that are still around to this day. And it unlocked understanding of what could come next from that. Technology is awesome for that. And just like using an optical sorter, we're not altering the grapes in any means. We're simply getting the purest, shiniest, almost hand-polished grape that I get to make wine from. And it is a great benefit.
That's awesome, yeah. And just to wrap up here, speaking of past vintages, you guys had some pretty cool scores come out for at least for your 2021 cab. Robert Parker giving the 97-99 range rating, which, yeah, quite a feat from those folks to be churning out such high scores now so early on in your guys' evolution.
When you start a project like this, as you'd mentioned early on, we started and we put Trothe out there and we said, we're at the top tier of wines. This is a luxury wine and you have to go about it with a straight face, right? And so for us to do that, Ray is a second generation winemaker with the history he'd had and going on 30 years of vintages, our fourth generation family farming operation. We felt like we could put together something special. But we continue to go forward, we knew we would need accolades from, of course, top critics and reputable sources to help back that up, because that builds reputation for any high-end winery. So then to actually receive them really early on, it's everything you could hope for. The 2019 cab, the 98, that was just our second vintage. If you'd seen the facility that Ray had to work in to make our 2019 cab, not only is it 98 great, but you'd be like, holy smokes, how did you pull that off? We were not always in this amazing facility that we have now. If you take our second vintage of Sauvignon Blanc, it received a 96 from Wine Advocate. That matches the highest score they've ever given a Washington white wine. That was just for Trothe, our second try. That wasn't Ray's second try, right? To get accolades like that, top-rated Malbec from Washington State as well. And the list seems to continue to go on, which we're super appreciative of, that critics are recognizing what we're trying to do here. Gives us a little affirmation that we are on the right track. And then you mentioned 21 Cab. We got an awesome accolade from that, from Decanter. We are in their top 50 U.S. wines list that just came out, and we're ranked number 46. So that's the first top 50 national wine list we've been on. Very thankful to be on that, and that's just a super cool accolade.
Yeah, the role of wine critics and wine reviewers in the world is important, because they are the voice, or they're the person who can taste and describe to their customers. So you find wine reviewers and critics that you match palates with, and they taste 10,000 wines, allows you to hunt and pick and keep on your own journey. So it has been great to have so many of these lovely people stop in and visit us and taste the wine, because we know we're doing it in the right way. And then the validation that comes feels nice, but it is that level that your customers need, especially in the world when there's so much stuff put out there that is luxury adjacent or it is quality like to it. You like to find the real genuine article. People like Jeff putting his entire farm and reputation into moving Washington's wines forward as his expression of the generation. And that is my biggest motivator now is my dad spent a lot of energy investing in Washington when it was quite unknown. For that reason, the frontier-like atmosphere of being a winemaker in the 80s and 90s. And now that means a lot to me to keep pushing that upwards and forwards, because to be taken seriously on the wine scene, you need to have lovely scores, but you also need to be doing all the things we're doing. And we're getting there.
There's always room for improvement. And that I think,
My life.
yeah, get a little bit better.
That's awesome, guys. You guys have certainly got some incredible traction so far, and it seems like only up from here, focusing on quality and again, providing really great experience for your consumers who are clearly happy with the product as well and excited about your future. And so the validation from the critics, validation from your customer base, I think both of those things, you guys obviously have a bright future up there, and wishing the best for all of Washington State, really putting those wines on the map. So glad that we could have you back here, share with our audience, and hopefully it happens for a third time too.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Awesome.
All right. That was our interview with Jeff Andrews and Ray McKee from Troth. I hope everybody found that really enlightening, and we'll go find out some Troth wines. Go to their website, check them out, get on the list. And if you want to find other great wines from around the world in Washington State, you can go to the vintmarketplace.com. We have some of the top wines from both New World and Old World wine regions. So go and check it out on the Vint Marketplace. And that is our episode for this week. We'll be back with another episode next week. Cheers.